together the frontier between so-called open source large language models and commercial API. So you see the spectrum like that. And we'll see what we learn in this journey. I'm Raphael Semeteys, head of the tech squad, senior architect. I'm also open source expert, and I'll speak a lot about open source in this talk. I'm in the group, first in Atos, but since 1999. And here are the details if you want to follow, read me, insert me, whatever, right? Okay, so large language model, LLM, it's quite the hype today, right? Well, we all know that AI started almost at the same time as computer science, so it's an old domain. Generative AI is not that young too, and a few years back, we already had language models, but they were not of the same quality that we have today. All right, so with projects like Word2Vec, Glove, and stuff like that. Everything changed in 2017 with the publication of a research paper by Google called "Attention is All You Need." So I have your attention, thanks, yes. And they introduced the transformer architecture, which was a new architecture to configure and to use neural networks. And this unlocked the capacities of the language model and started the era of large language model, leading to all the hype that we've seen, and we are still in the hype, definitely, with generative AI, ChatGPT going public, and crazy people saying that we all go unemployed and that kind of stuff. And also the rise of concern about responsibility. Is it okay to give AI to anybody? Is it dangerous? And you know, everybody has seen the movies and stuff, so everybody is going crazy about AI today, right? And the hype is not finished. Tomorrow, maybe, or today already, we have also smart language models, because the new frontier is the mobile, how to run artificial intelligence on your device. We have agents and large action models, so models you can interact with machines and stuff like that. But let's focus for now on LLM, right? Well, I'm an open source guy, and I believe that in the hype we are today, GenAI is having its Linux moment. What do I mean by that? Is just like open source, and actually, by the way, the internet, it's all started in labs, military or universities, but in labs where researchers were used to share their work and they used to build on top of each other result, right? Just like software at the beginning, free software, you know, the beginning of software science. Same thing with generative AI and LLMs, but then it started to get adopted by individuals, and also now entering a big $1 billion, euros, dollar, yen, whatever, you name it, with big players now positioning themselves in this domain. So we're in the enterprise stage, right? And if the trend is the same as I know and as I lived with open source, I predict that this component, LLMs we're speaking about and stuff, will become commodities. Why? Because that's the natural trend, so we are able to keep innovating on top of those bricks and to go at a higher order of innovation, right? But let's think about the enterprise stage, because that's definitely where we stand. And because it's like open source, this time is going very much faster. So it's very quick. A lot of money, announcement, new models, new partnership every week, every day, every hour even. It's crazy. So let's step back a little bit with the open source knowledge that we have and what we learned about how open source did enter the enterprise and the world, actually. It changed the world. And analyze the dynamics between collaborative openness and commercial ownership. Because there's a lot of initiatives now that pretends to be open source, for instance. Let's visit that and maybe explore the 50 shades of openness that we can have. And to do that, what I propose is come back to the roots. What about the licenses? Licenses of the models, or licenses of the system, or the things that we are using or starting to use and build our application with. And just like with open source, it's important to understand what is going on, what we can do or not. Because just like with open source, if you do it afterward, it's a lot of work, right? So when you want to assess the openness of a large language model, what should we focus on? which are the components, the artifact that we should check, is it available, is it documented, can I use it, can I modify it, can I reuse it, right? So these are the main 3 steps to train a model. You know, so you do some self-supervised pre-training activities, and then you get a foundational models. From this model, you can derive fine-tuned model, but you need another kind of data set and mechanism to put in place. And when it's reinforced by humans, you also have other components. Now there's also this new way of training models and adapting them with DPO, which is a new technique. But basically, you have several components involved, and you have to check what is the level of openness of these different components. So the first one is the model. The model is not really the architecture or even the code to implement the neural network. At the end of the day, it's the wave. So it's the result of the training and the configuration of the neural network, if you wish. All right? Are these waves available? Is it possible to me to get the model with the weight, to install it on my box, for instance, and to run the model or not, right? Or can I even modify things on this? The other part that we have to check are the data sets, whether the huge amount of data that are used to do the pre-training, or the more smaller, more specialized data that you can use to fine-tune the model and specialize it to a domain or to a certain kind of action, like chat with humans, for instance, right? Then, sometimes, when there is a reward model, you have to check, is it available also? And do we know how human and reinforcement and adaptation of the model were made? Is it available also? And then at the end, all the code, as I said, it's not the code of the model itself, it's all the data processing code. All the heavy lifting, how to retrain a model. Can I take everything and then do it in-house, for instance? How open is this code also? And then based on that, what we propose is such a matrix where we evaluate the openness of these different main artifacts. With a scoring going from 0, completely closed, it's a black box, you don't know anything, to 4, it's completely open, so you have access to it, you can understand it, you can modify it, you can reuse it, without any restriction. And if you don't have any restriction on that, then yes, it goes to the definition of something that we call open source, all right? And in between, you have you have information, but it's published paper, so you have general information about the architecture and stuff, but not too much detail. All right, it's more for peer review by research peers and fellows. 2, you can access to the artifact, but you have whether to pay or whether to prove that your intent is only for research. So it's gated, let's say. And 3, it's open, you can use it, you can even modify it, but you have a restriction of what you can do with the model or even your modified version of the model afterwards, right? What I propose is to go and illustrate the 50 shades of openness by going and analyzing a few models that are known or less known, just to check and give some examples of this level of openness. Let's start with market-leading players and with OpenAI, because they started the hype, let's say, in a way. But they started as a non-profit organization in the US. And as you see, the beginning, and the name, OpenAI, the objective was to raise the bar regarding artificial intelligence for the wealth of humankind and that kind of stuff. So the first generation of GPT were pretty open. The model was open, we could use it, modify it, no problem. Not so much information regarding the data set, how the model is trained, or the code, but still, it was open. That changed with the hype, with the $1 billion from Microsoft for everybody who invested in this domain. There's a lot of money to make with LLMs now, just like with software, when people selling big machines like IBM understood that software had value. That's what created open source software or free software as a reaction, all right? They said, we're closing everything. We don't have any more information about how things are done. And ChatGPT, which is a fine-tuned version, let's say, of GPT for chat with a human, is just described in a research paper, right? But that's not all. And that's why when you check the component you are using, you have to check the licenses also, because it's not because it's completely open that you don't have more restriction. And you have that in the terms of use of OpenAI. That is very important to know, is you can't use the output to develop other models that compete with OpenAI. Very important point. Do not compete with us. No commercial. You don't make money with things that are coming from OpenAI if you want to train another model. And we'll see what impact it has on other initiatives. Let's speak a little bit about Google. So you know Google, we're the guy who created the transformer architecture, let's say, in a way. So that started with open source implementation. That was the pre-LLM hype period, so everything was open. The dataset, yeah, well, you need some special authorization to access it, but basically the code and the model were open, right? That changed also with the hype. First with Palm 2, now with Gemini, where everything is described in research paper, but you don't have that much information on it. But what Google did more recently, they adopted a more pragmatic approach, and they also released an open model that is called Gemma, that exists in parallel of Gemini, where you can reuse it, you can even modify Gemma with certain restriction. You don't have any more information, so much information about the data set because it might be the same one. We don't really know that is used to train Gemini. But they do provide a tool chain, so they really want to push the communities to adopt Gemma and to modify, fine-tune Gemma, reuse Gemma, right? Interesting move to see. So they started like OpenAI, and then they changed a little bit their strategy. But they also, that's why I put a tree with on the model. They put some restriction about what you can do with the model or its derivative. So if you fine-tune the model or you're based on Gemma and you do your own model, then you can't do illegal activities and license practices of profession, abuse, whatever. Everything is going under the term responsible AI. So you have to be responsible, don't do harm, don't do bad things and stuff. So that's very nice. There's a lot of polemics and discussions at government levels in the US, UK, Europe, everywhere, all right? But as an open source purist, this contradicts the definition of open source. As soon as you restrict the usage as you do of the artifact, you can't say the license is open source. Something else. Just to say. So let's say it's open, right? But you have some restriction about what you can do. And if you want to start a business like that, well, a business in illegal activities, that's a very lucrative business on the planet. They don't care about the licenses. But if you want to do something, I don't know, regarding monitoring people without consent, or sometimes the limitation are do not do things in health domain, that kind of stuff, you have to be aware about those restrictions before, because one day you might have some problem, right? The other big players, let's go very quickly on those because now, because it's a very big market, the big players of IT today, they're all trying to catch up with the race and find their own marking. They want to have a piece of the big cake, right? So that's why they create their own models, whether they're open or not. So that's the case for Azure, for instance, Microsoft with Phi-3, which is a small language model, right? Or AWS with Titan, not that known maybe. IBM with Granite, for instance, on code generation. Or Apple, who made the announcement a few weeks ago about Apple Intelligence. Good play on word, AI. Good finding with OpenELM, which is an open source, large language model. Elon Musk with XAI and then Grok. Okay, with all the polemics we know about the openness and he started to sue OpenAI, saying that you're not fulfilling the commitment you took at the beginning. Then he dropped the suit. And then he had to open a little bit Grok to say, I'm doing what I'm criticizing to the other four. And also, not only in the US and in Europe, for instance, Alibaba with his Qwen 2 open model also. What they do also, because you need a lot of infrastructure to train the model, because they are large, very large, and to even infer, so run the model, they also do a lot of partnerships for the infrastructure. So that's why here you see all the infrastructure providers, the cloud service providers partnering, Microsoft with OpenAI, for instance, AWS with Anthropic, which provides cloud large language model, Oracle with XAI and Elon Musk, and Alibaba doing his own thing. right? So there's a lot of moves. It's moving quite fast. Interesting to analyze here. But there is a player I didn't speak about here. Maybe it's because he's not an infrastructure provider. That's why maybe he did this move. They started in the open, definitely, hence the name Roberta. So that was the pre-hype LLM hype, right? So it was quite open, some limitation on the data set, but the model completely open, the code completely open. Then, with the hype, they surfed it, but they decided, well, I won't go into the story for the purist, how the weights were leaked or not leaked and stuff, but still, the model open, meaning that we can reuse the model. So it's not the same case as OpenAI or Palm 2 at that time, all right? So they say, yes, you can reuse the model. We don't give you that much information about the data set and the code, but still you can do that. You have to read the terms of use, though, because first thing, with LLaMA 2, they said, all right, you can reuse it, derive it, make your own, but if you start to make money with it, so they say more than 700 million monthly active users, then come and see us because we want part of the business also. Basically, it's protection, right? Okay, and with LLaMA 3, the new version, they are even more restrictive about the redistribution. Now, they impose people to say it was built with Meta LLaMA 3, this large language model, and in the name, you have to prefix it with LLaMA 3 also. So just, hey, we're Meta, we did something, you have to acknowledge that, all right? Restriction. So you have to know that too. If you create your own model and you say it's Zebulon or whatever, it should be LLaMA 3 Zebulon, right? According to the license, at least. But anyway, they did started something because they allowed people to reuse the model, and that's what did universities in the US, 2 of them, creating the Alpaca and Vicuna. So when you know that the upstream model is called LLaMA, who says data scientists don't have a sense of humor? Here's the proof. So what they did, they inherit the level of openness from the upstream model, because it's LLaMA 2, so it's 3 and 1 on model and 3 training dataset, and they use another dataset to pre-train, to fine-tune, their own model. But what they did, they used information coming from ChatGPT to do that. And ChatGPT basically is a way to share information coming from OpenAI. So remember the restriction from OpenAI. You have some restriction here. Do not compete with us. Do not make money. You can't use outputs of OpenAI to train a commercial LLM that will compete with us. So basically, researchers for research only. You can't make money with that, or you'll have to discuss with OpenAI at what point, right? So important to know. What is interesting also, it's not the only initiative that started to collaborate and try to work in the open, let's say. And we have a few initiatives here, a few examples of initiatives to create foundational model that might be a little bit more open, for instance. So basically what you see here is a non-profit organization, research institute all over the world, in the US, in Europe, or even in the Emirates. And I put Mistral because it's French and it's an enterprise. It's an interesting use case. I will focus on it later, right? What you see here is basically on the model is pretty open. When sometimes you see it's 3 and it's not 4 because there's this notion of responsible AI playing there. But they did work on the data set also. Now we want to open the data set. We want to know what is in the data set. Are we able to reuse it? How can you reuse it? Are there restrictions about how we use the data set? Because at the end of the day, it's all about data also, because you train your model, right? And the code is pretty shared, or sometimes you just have some general instructions or examples. What you have to know there is they worked on the data set, but sometimes researchers, they don't really care about that. And they said, when you want to create a big data set, you take some subset that you aggregate, all right? And those subsets can have different licenses and different restrictions. And it's taken from, I think it's from Bloom, this one. Please refer to the specific license depending on the subset you use. So we didn't do the job. It's for you to care about that. Be careful of that kind of stuff, because it can hide some problem for the future, for instance, right? So some fuzziness still about dataset, and this notion of responsible usage. There, if I take Falcon, the program, the LLM, coming from the Emirates, it's an Apache license, so everybody say, oh, it's open source, but it's a modified Apache license, right? And the modification is changing everything, because basically they say, Hosting services may require a separate license. So if you want to use Falcon and do Falcon as a service, you have to go and see the Falcon people and give them money, for sure. Right? So be careful about that. Mistral. Mistral is a good example because, you know, we're in France. I'm French. And the French cuisine is well known. It's all about the sauce, and the sauce is about mixing the good ingredients, right? And that's what is doing Mistral in two different ways. The first way is the mix of model. So that's the kind of architecture they adopted, which is called mixture of expert. Basically, it's a way to parallelize a more specialized model to make one big, more efficient model, called Mixtral, right? They also mix their offering because they offer foundational models and fine-tuned model. But what is more interesting is the mix of business model they are doing, right? The way they provide the models. They started with what they call open source. You remember, I don't like this word, so let's say open model, right? That was the first model that they released, all right, allowing people to reuse it and stuff. And then they raised a lot of money again. They entered the arena, the hype, the gold rush, whatever you call it. And they started also to provide some commercial version of the model called small, large, and embed for embeddings, right? But what they did, they also went innovative here by creating this notion of sustainable openness with the new CodeStral model, which is a code generation model. And they said, well, it's for non-production only. So it's open, but not for production, right? So what is interesting here, just like with open source, what we observed in the history of open source is the rise of community version versus enterprise version, or you call it like the children version for grown-up version, or optimized version for the enterprise. You can play with this, but you have to pay us for that, right? Just like open source. What is interesting in their license is here, the non-production license from Mistral is testing, research, etc., no production environment. It's very clear. There's another restriction here, which is interesting also, is no SaaS. Just like some few others before them, all right? And that's interesting because, again, it remembers me the story of open source. You remember about MongoDB, Elasticsearch, more recently Terraform, who went out of open source definition because they wanted to fight against cloud providers, making a lot of money with their component, without contributing back money or code or participating in the community. It's exactly the same move here. They say, we open, but we don't want a big CSP to come and take Mistral and make a lot of money without us having any part of it, right? Let me speed up a little bit. Let's go back now or forward to fine-tune models and the way to do it in the collaborative way, all right? For the three first, because you have open foundational models, you can use and base your fine-tuned version on those models. That's the case with Dolly, so Databricks, the company, that use GPT-J from LLaMA, Bloom Bloom, and Zephyr from Hugging Face, which is a fine-tuned version of Mistral, right? So basically, they inherit also the level of openness of the upstream model, and then they had their own fine-tuning dataset with different level of openness. For instance, interesting thing here, Bloomchat reused the dataset from Dolly, and another one, Lion, which is made by a German, very serious people, very concerned about how open things are. So it's a 4, for instance. But sometimes the weird model, we don't have any information, so we don't really know. Basically, they share the code to do the heavy lifting and to reproduce and do things in-house. They might have some restriction, right? And you see that they fear, and LLM 360 that I will speak about right now, they did the same thing. They reused results from OpenAI, so basically you inherit the restriction from OpenAI, right? The two last are more recent and interesting because basically their objective is clearly to say we want to be the most open model. So we're trying to do open source model or open model, right? So LLM 36, they did that. The point that they use OpenAI, so I don't know if they know or if they care about the restriction of OpenAI, but that might be a problem. No a lot of information about any reward model, for instance. Olmo, which is quite a recent one from AI Institute Allen Institute for AI in the US, is pretends to be the most open, 5 minutes, yes, most open model existing right now. They are pretty open. They did some very nice work on the data set, and they did clearly create new data set and create new licenses to clearly state what you can do with them. So that's the case with LLaMA, Tulu, or Ultra Feedback, even for the adapters of the DPO method, for instance. And there, when you have to know is still, you have this notion of responsible AI. If I take Olmo licenses on the dataset, for instance, no military weapon surveillance, disclaiming that the text is machine generated, not disclaiming that the text is machine generated, biometrics and stuff and stuff. So here you have some limitation also. It's not only, I don't know, if you want to do something on law enforcement with the model, then you have a problem because you contradict the license, right? So you have to check those aspects. Accelerating. I spoke about the Linux moment of OpenAI, and as you understood, for me, it's because of the openness, because of the license, that everything, the community and the ecosystem are building up because they're able to reuse and to build on top of each other. But there are other components of this Linux moment, just like Linux and open source in general at the time. 3 main points. The first one, collaborative tools and ecosystem. A lot of tools, platforms, websites emerging and helping the community to organize and share recipes and stuff, like Hugging Face, which is basically the GitHub of AI, like Jupyter Notebook, that is a very easy way to share recipe and to share code and how to do things, or Archive to share the PDFs and research papers, for instance. All right, and there's a lot of innovation, and innovation, I put technical innovation, but also business innovation, just what you saw with Mistral, for instance, new business models. Well, that look a lot like open source models, but you see where the innovation is going also. Another point is all the work that is done on hardware side to optimize things. So of course, all the big players, they created their own AI chips. So GPU first, yes, TPUs, whatever use, right? But there's also, on software level, the quantization mechanism that allows to adapt the models that were trained for different kind of CPUs or hardware restriction. And LLaMA C++ is a good, interesting open source project because it's doing just that. And then it allows you, for instance, to run the model locally on the CPU. You don't need a GPU. Well, you need a CPU and a lot of memory, but still, it's possible. Or in a container. Oh, yeah, and then you can create architecture and you know, deploy your LLMs in different ways, not very centralized. And speaking about centralization, innovation in open source way, that's the way. LLaMA is about to release a new version where they'll be able to run the models on multiple nodes, so decentralized AI, right? They're working on that right now, right? And last aspect, all the tools and the framework that will help people to get the LLM, interact with the LLM, install the LLM. So it's not the LLM themselves, but all the ecosystem surrounding those artifacts. Doing it the Unix way, the open source way, it's do one thing well. I will focus on doing one thing, but I want to do it the best way I can. And I believe that other people who are doing the same in a different area will be able to assemble the bricks together and to create something of higher order. By doing that, you need and you generate some standards, open standards. So for instance, Onyx or GGML, which is the format of LLaMA C++, standards to distribute some models, for instance. Just a few examples. There are many other ones. Right? Or LangChain that everybody knows today, which is a good way of framework to abstract things and to speed up the adoption of LLM, for instance. That started into Python, but now which is going beyond Python. And for me, the Linux moment is also because Python is the data scientist language of preference, but it's democratizing, so it's going to Java, Rust, you name it, beyond Python. All right, that's the Linux moment I'm talking about. And just maybe to conclude, a few takes away. I tried to show you all the spectrum that you have between completely closed APIs, black boxes, you don't know what is behind, and something that we could call not even OpenAI free AI, but like free, like in freedom, not like in free beer, if you know what free software is. That's it, the definition. Well, a way of putting it. And in between, some people would say we are open source, but sometimes they're open weight. They just share the weight. You don't know the data set, you don't know really the restriction, you have to check and things. So be aware when you use that kind of component in your architecture, in your solution. You want to inject LLM and AI in your solutions, about the data set in the upstream, because it can be some transitivity of the restrictions, about also the competitive clauses that you might have. Do not compete with us, share the cake with us, that kind of stuff. And the responsible AI restriction also, right? You have to be aware of that. Another way to see the evolution, I'm coming back to my first slide when I spoke about Linux moment. We're moving from open research to competitive market. And we're in between here. We're somewhere here now. Competitive ecosystem, right? Because you see a lot of partnership now between businesses, competitive actors like AWS with as I said, Claude, or with more recently Apple with OpenAI, who will provide OpenAI in iOS 18, I think it's. I'm not an iOS guy, huh? I'm open source. But you see, and that's the evolution. That's the same evolution that we saw in any IT business, and more specifically in open source, with all the collaboration that we have. The collaboration is not only on the code and on the licenses; it's on the business that you do. All right. So I do believe that openness fosters reuse and collaboration, and I hope that I proved that to you with a few examples. But you have to check what does it mean to be open, and I know that collaboration brings commoditization, especially when it's done in the open source way. Nobody's trying to compete with, I don't know, commodities in open source. Well, Tomcat is not a good example, but not even Node.js, but we'll see that later. But you see what I mean? Commodities, and then we start to build with these bricks, and we go further. And that's what is going on with generative AI, I think. So yeah, it's just like open source for me, but much, much faster. That's why you have to learn from open source and to be a little bit aware of what's going on. AI loves open source, uses open source. Open source should love AI also, so we know what's going on, for instance. It's another way to be responsible, right? Different way. You put some regulation or, well, let's not get into the politics here. But that's it. And at the end of the day, just like with open source, it's not commercial and closed black box between crazy people who share everything. Just like with open source, we have all the colors of the rainbow to make something very great and a new domain where we'll start and we keep innovating together. So partnering with money makers, cloud providers, big CSP, but also with communities or participating or contributing to open source communities. All right, thank you very much.